Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism. My hope is that by understanding this better, you can help yourself in difficult relationships, toxic situations at work and family, you name it. And if you get it, then you might be in a better position to maybe even avoid it in the first place. If you're new to this channel, please subscribe. And for those of you looking to do a deeper dive into the world of healing, I know for a lot of you are saying, okay, this is great. Thanks for helping us understand this, but I'm really still wrecked by this and I would like to do deeper work on healing. We do have a new healing program. And if you go to the video notes and click the link, you'll get more information. So today I'm going to take on an interesting issue that has come up on this issue of a lot of people talk about abandonment when it comes to narcissistic relationships. Frankly, it's the narcissists who tend to have more trouble with abandonment than anyone else. But there's an interesting thing that's come up, and I think this distinction is really worth talking about. It's this other thing that I think often gets confused with abandonment. So let's take that on. Let's talk about this idea of disposability versus abandonment. Okay. So I have often talked on this channel about how narcissistic folks struggle with abandonment. For all their tough person exterior, they do. Now, it makes sense given that narcissism is at its core an attachment issue. They may not think of it as such, but they don't do well when they feel that they're being left. It's an ego injury, and it raises anxiety, which raises shame, which raises rage. Abandonment may raise a host of reactions in narcissistic people, ranging from rage to violence to agitation to manipulation, even to despair. Now, people in narcissistic people in relationships with narcissists will often struggle with the roller coaster that these relationships are. We know that trauma bonded relationships are often characterized by something we call approach and avoidance, in out kind of thing. Love bomb, seduce, idealize, you're my everything, and then the pivot to invalidate, gaslight, devalue, discard, and then back to idealize, seduce, and then back to devalue and discard. It's a whole pleasure pain sequence, almost akin to an addiction cycle. And people will feel rather unsettled by these cycles, yet also seduced. They're very hard to break out of these cycles. That's the trauma bond, the alternation, right? Now, some people in narcissistic relationships, especially very trauma bonded ones, bring their own abandonment issues into the relationships. And I acknowledge that. But a far bigger proportion of people in narcissistic relationships aren't struggling with abandonment. It's something else. Many will say, I actually don't care if they leave or cut out of this relationship. In fact, will even acknowledge that it would be a relief. But the thing that many people struggle with in narcissistic relationships is this idea of disposability. Now, what is disposability? It's exactly what it sounds like. It's the sense that you are somehow dispensable, disposable, get rid of youable. That your purpose is, well, once your purpose is done with, that you serve no function. It feels like being an empty soda can that isn't even going to get recycled, or an empty takeout container. You were interesting when you held their drink or their lunch, but then once lunch was done or the soda was drunk, bye-bye. Frankly, disposability is one of the most painful dynamics of the narcissistic relationship. Nobody in the world none of us like to think of ourselves as disposable. And frankly, I don't believe human beings are disposable. The world at large may even treat a lot of people as disposable. The fact is, nobody is. And this dynamic of disposability is so acute in the narcissistic relationship because they really do. Narcissistic people view people as disposable. Now, people I have worked with who were raised in narcissistic family systems will let me know that their sense, their schema of disposability was established in childhood when they really did get the sense that unless they were useful to their parents, then they weren't noticed or valued. And being useful might have been being helpful to the parents or performing or looking the way that the parent wanted or validating the parent. As children, they were neither seen nor heard nor noticed. Then, when that person gets into adulthood, there is again that fear of disposability. Why not? You had it as you were disposable as a child. And the assumption that it's likely because it happened so often in childhood. So, as folks like this meet new people, friends, partners, coworkers, they assume that they will be disposable to these people as well. So, the dynamic of disposability can lead people to hold back on expressing their needs and their wants in a relationship. A person may feel that as long as I am doing something, I'm useful to this other person, then they'll keep me around because I'm useful. But as soon as I become any kind of a burden, or I need something, or I feel something, or I can't be all of the things that the other person needs, that I will be tossed aside with the assumption that I wasn't worth the bother, that you aren't worth the bother. So it's really not about the other person abandoning you. People who are more impacted by this dynamic of disposability care less about abandonment and are more impacted by this idea that once they are not useful, they will be let go. And that concept that someone can view themselves as being so disposable is tragic, because the person who sees and experiences themselves as disposable is often easy prey for a narcissist, because then that person will keep doing and doing and doing for the narcissist. And since narcissistic folks see everybody as disposable, that when the narcissistic person no longer needs that person, and that day will always come, it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The narcissist lets them go, and then the person who was let go of feels disposed of. To me, disposability in some ways is almost like a less primitive issue than abandonment. Abandonment has its roots in infantile patterns, usually issues that stem from experiences in early relationships, chaotic relationships with early caregivers, distracted caregivers, inconsistency with early caregivers, or other disruptions at that phase of life. Disposability is less primal. It's more of a schema, a way of thinking about ourselves and our relationships. It's not any easier, but it captures something that many people in narcissistic relationships feel is not adequately discussed. They're like, this isn't abandonment, but it's something else. People will over and over say, it's really not a fear of abandonment that keeps me stuck. But the disposability piece feels really gross and awful. It brings up childhood hurts, but again, it doesn't feel as primal as that sort of big, empty, terrifying fear of abandonment. In a narcissistic relationship, it's not entirely a distortion, this idea of disposability, because to a narcissist, you are disposable. Most people, for trauma bonded reasons, will often fight to make these relationships work. They keep working harder and harder, which makes it easier and easier for the narcissist. And the harder you work at that relationship, there is the assumption that the less likely that that narcissist will be able to dispose of you, right? Because they need you so much. Now, don't get me wrong. The narcissist doesn't want to lose you. You are supply. You are convenient. And while you aren't interesting to them when you aren't serving a function for them, you become very interesting when they need you. Think of it this way. Narcissistic people like to put people up on shelves, like you put like extra stuff you store, like when you go to a warehouse store, and they pull them down when they need them. That obviously lends itself to a feeling of disposability, because that means when you, for example, may want to do something like share something about yourself or your life, or you may need something yourself, the narcissistic person is going to feel very inconvenienced or even aggravated. Your needs are rarely addressed in these narcissistic relationships, nor is space held for your needs. You're bothering them when you do that. And that leaves a person feeling disposable. And that can be a very painful feeling if it is a repetition of what happened in childhood. And any child who survived narcissistic relationships in childhood did have that experience. I hope this clarified this distinction between feeling disposable and feeling abandoned, because many people in narcissistic relationships will say that it's really not about the feeling of abandonment. Rather, it's something less sort of deep or primal, but it's still very, very hurtful. The idea that if you aren't performing exactly the way the narcissist wants you to, you'll be tossed aside and devalued. It's the nature of narcissism. They view people through an egocentric and what we call an instrumental lens, what works for them with no interest in the needs or wants of other people. No more than you try to figure out, you'd sit, and I don't sit to talk to my soda can and say, what do you want? What are you about? How are you feeling? Before you throw it away. They view you similarly like that soda can. And always remind yourself, don't personalize. That is on them. Their capacity to view people so disposably, that's on them, because just because people see you as disposable doesn't make you disposable. Please remember that. Because again, that idea that no matter, I'm going to make myself, I'm going to do everything they won't be able to get rid of me. They'll be totally into me. But I think there's this reason a lot of people in narcissistic relationships are on the edge of their seat. They feel that at any given moment that you're going to be tossed aside, again, like that proverbial soda can. And like I said, it's not a distortion. There's a real reality to that. And that feels dehumanizing and awful. And if anything like that happened to you in childhood, it can really, really sting in adulthood. In fact, a lot of people say, I wish the narcissist would abandon me. It might hurt for a minute, but I'd be okay. That disposability piece, somehow, it feels for some people even worse, and it can set up a bad precedent in ongoing relationships where people feel like they have to keep doing and doing and doing and hold back on their own needs and wants so they don't get tossed aside. Hope that clarifies that. Thanks again.